Yes.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, and you're not echoey, so I'm going to hand over now to Strive, one of Strive's founders, Laurie Heisey, and research directors, and she will introduce today's Learning Lab. Thanks, Laurie.
Great. Thank you, Annie. Welcome with, I think, a very exciting presentation that is going to be on the work that Ben Sislagi, who is here at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and Paranita Bhattacharjee, who is with the Karnataka Health Promotion Trust, as well as working seconded at the moment, I believe, to the Kenyan government on issues around HIV prevention among sex workers. What we're going to hear today is the outcome of some field work that Ben and Paranita and her team were conducting in Karnataka, so in the south of India, related to some of the social norms that have been influencing the two of the trials that were engaged in terms of interventions. One is intervention to look at keeping girls in school as a strategy for reducing child marriage and improving life outcomes for girls as a way of reducing the risk of HIV. And the second is Samvedana, which is a program geared to helping women who sell sex to protect themselves using female condoms, as well as deal with violence in their intimate partnerships. We often hear about issues of violence against sex workers by police and other people in their outside environment or their work environment. But like all women, they're also vulnerable to violence in their relationships. So I'll turn it over to you, Paranita.
Welcome, everybody. So today's presentation, as Laurie clearly said, is talking about social norms on child marriage and intimate partner violence in Karnataka and India. This is based on some of the work that KHPT, me and our team in Karnataka and London School is doing under the Strive Consortium, but also includes the work that we are doing with MRC under the Works to Prevent Violence Consortium. I'm going to talk a little bit about the context and the project, just to give you an overview, and then Ben is going to talk about the findings of the work that we did, and I'm going to then take over to talk a little bit about how we use the findings to improve or revise our interventions. One of the projects that we did this work is called Samata. This project works with adolescent girls, and the main aim of the project is to increase the proportion of adolescent girls who enter secondary education, complete 10th standard, and we hope that by keep entering secondary education and retaining them in secondary education, we would be able to delay their marriage and delay sexual debut. Change proposes that by reducing negative gender norms in adolescent girls and boys, building girls' sense of agency, confidence, improving girls' academic performance in school, and increasing appreciation of value of girl-child education in their families, and strengthening school capacity to be responsive in combination with youth dropout of girls from school and delay their marriage. So it's a multi-level intervention which works primarily with the adolescent girls from class 7 to class 10, but also has a very robust intervention around those girls to create a supportive environment by working with their families, working with the boys in the community, working with the larger community, and of course a very strong school component. The project is being implemented by KHPT in 2 districts. It's 2 northern Karnataka, one of the poorest districts with very low one of the highest actually school dropouts among girls, one of the highest child marriage rates in northern Karnataka, a southern state in India. And we are specifically working with in India. We call them scheduled caste and scheduled tribe because that's where the highest dropout and highest child marriages. We are working with 3,600 adolescent girls coming from 1,800 families in around more than 100 villages. And the school intervention works with 190 schools. And these villages are the basically catchment area for these schools. Girls from these villages come to these 190 schools, both higher secondary and higher primary schools. So this is Project Samata. The second project is Project Parivartan Plus, and it aims to reduce partner violence, intimate partner violence, and increase condom in intimate partnership of female sex workers. The location of the project is again North Karnataka. The common district is Bagalkot district. It works in 47 villages in Bagalkot district with 800 female sex workers and their intimate partners. And the intervention design is such that it works with female sex workers directly, largely through participatory reflection sessions, development of safety plans, leadership training, providing violence support, crisis support when violence happens, counseling support, and linkage to healthcare and other commodities. It also works with intimate partners of female sex workers, identified, of course, by the female sex workers, through regular one-to-one sessions, but also through group reflection workshops and training of male champions, and also couple events. The project is being implemented with a community-based, sex worker-led community-based organizations. So a lot of work also happens in building capacity and strengthening of the community-based organizations and the crisis management and violence management teams that they have, including district-level advocacy, networking, and alliance building. These are rural sex workers, so they stay in communities where other people stay. So in the context of violence, we also work with the larger community on basically setting up community dialogue sessions, street plays, and folk shows to create an environment where violence in general would be not tolerated. So now we would move over to findings, and I'll hand it over to Ben.
Thank you, Pari. In the summer 2016, we visited the project locations, and it was Pari, myself, and a larger team from KHPT. And we conducted some focus group discussions. In the case of Samata, the project that aims at reducing school dropout and child marriage, we talked to parents, teachers, girls, boys, and essentially what I'm going to tell you now is one particular thing among many that these participants in the discussions that we see in the themes and they emerge from those discussions. So in particular, we were talking about the life of the girls and the obstacles to girls' participation at school and school enrollment. And one of the things that came out is the theme of mobility. So our participants were almost unanimously telling us that so when a girl is a child, so before she reaches puberty, she has quite a large mobility. Of course, there are zones in the red where she can't go, that are not safe to her. Zones where she might go with her parents or in which she needs to be protected, and then a large part that is instead safer for her. A large part that here includes also the school that is represented by that square with the open book. So what was interesting instead is that participants described to us a drastic change in the mobility of the girl as she reached puberty. So as puberty arrived, so essentially as she started to exhibit body features of a grown-up woman, then her mobility drastically reduced, and it mostly gravitated around the family's household and a few protected households. But what is certain is that the school became unsafe as the walk, the journey from home to school. And you might think that one of the reasons why the school became a dangerous place for this girl or girls once they reach puberty is because their parents will be concerned with their actual safety. So they will be afraid of girls being harassed and girls potentially being raped, and incidences of rape were reported, although not in a large number. But what was really interesting to us is that the parents seemed to be, and girls reported, and teachers as well. So our participants were agreeing on the fact that parents were at least as concerned for the actual safety of the girl, as they were actually worried of what people would say if they saw this girl, their girl, talking to boys, hanging out with boys, or going around alone in places where she might be teased and harassed by boys. So, in other words, people were telling us, well, if my neighbors see my daughter alone, what will they say? And they, why? Well, because they will think that they might be harassed. And harassed was shameful, would threaten family honor. Which is why this presentation today is called Honor and Reputation. So we really found the importance of honor in influencing girls' mobility after she reached puberty. And we look at this from a social norm perspective. And here's two norms that emerged. And by the way, I'm presenting now the empirical findings, and I'll tell you three theoretical things that we learned and that can be helpful in working on social norms. So the first norm that we found is that girls are not supposed to take part in romantic or sexual activities. Here it says active or passive, but what we really mean is consensual or enforced upon them before marriage, and that neighbors disapprove of girls who are seen in situations that might potentially suggest they are doing that. They are engaging in romantic or sexual activities. The other norm that we found was on the parents. So while the first one was on the girls, the second one was on the parents, that good parents are not supposed to let the girls go out after 12, or anyway when it's not really the anographical age, it's the biological age when their body expresses the features of puberty. And that people disapprove of those parents. So parents were afraid of what people would say about the girl and how that would impact on the honor of the family, but also what that will say about them. So let me just tell you before I compare and reflect on the learnings. The other thing that we did, we talked with participants and community outreach workers in the Samvedana Plus project that, as Pari said, works with female sex workers and their intimate partners. So we talk to female sex workers, we talk to their intimate partners, we talk to the community outreach workers, and we played a little role-play game, among other things, that you see in those two pictures, where essentially we described a vignette. And that's in itself a learning lesson. So we didn't just talk people through the vignette, we actually anchored the story to physical objects, so that which made it much easier to follow. And so essentially, the story was the story of a man and a woman, and the two have a fight, and the man decides not to hit his wife or his lover, and what the participants told us, particularly the men, but also the women, the female participants, they told us, well, all men hit their wives and lovers. Right? In India, we don't believe surveys that say 75% do, it's 100%. And then they also told us quite clearly, if a man doesn't hit his wife or his lover, or anyway a woman that she's romantically engaged with, when she deserves it, when she does something to deserve it, and she tells that to her friends, to his friends, well, his friends will say, "Well, are you not brave enough? Just go back, drink 2 beers, and hit her, beat her up, give her what she deserves." On the other hand, what women told us is that they couldn't really speak about the violence they were going through with the neighbors, and in the case of the female sex workers, with the other female sex workers, because there was this idea that all these women were pretending that the relationship was perfect, and if they did speak, well, the reaction would be that they would be told, "Oh, it's your fault. If you've been beaten, it's your fault. You're supposed to manage your man. You're supposed to tolerate violence." So, in other words, in Samvedana, we found, among others, these 2 norms. The first one is about women's capacity of tolerating violence, or better, the fact that women are supposed to tolerate violence, so women don't complain about violence, they deal with it, and that the other female sex workers would disapprove of a woman or of a female sex worker who speaks about violence, and they will say it's your fault if you've been beaten, and they will call her weak or incapable of managing a relationship. The other norm that we found is that men believe that all men hate their wives or lovers, and men would disapprove of one man who's not brave enough to beat his wife or lover when she deserves it. Now, what do we do, though, with these empirical findings? Well, because we have some important learnings. Because these men told us, yes, these norms exist. Well, they didn't say it this way, but they gave us evidence that the norm existed. But they said, this is really not the ultimate reason why I hit my wife or my lover. I do it because she has cheated on me, I'm drunk. So we have 3 important learnings from the empirical findings that I just showed to you. The first one is that norms act in interaction. So there is a system of norms. There are clusters of norms that are woven together into the fabric of the social reality that people live into. So while all this research on social norms coming out of FGC tends to stress the fact that people comply with female genital cutting in West Africa because there is a specific norm around female genital cutting in their village, what we found in India was that the behavior of hitting wife was as much influenced by the belief that, well, my friends will need to, but was also will tell me that I have to, but was as much sustained by that norm as by the norm of family privacy, so neighbors are not supposed to intervene, by the norm of tolerating violence, so women are not supposed to go around and say that they're not capable of managing their husband, and family honor, so the idea that family affairs are dealt from the inside the family. So that's the first learning. The second learning that is quite important as well is that norms can't be treated in isolation, and norms interventions need to understand how norms interact with other factors, be it structural factors, be it material factors, social and individual. So laws, resources, availability of models, aspirations, skills, knowledge, and we have developed this framework that is called the dynamic framework of social change, but is really a framework of social norms and their interaction with other factors that kind of stresses the importance of looking at the intersection between domains. So if you're looking at social norm, how are they interacting with the law? If there is a law that protects women from domestic violence, is the police going to enforce it? Or there are norms that make it so that the police would just laugh at the woman who's complaining and say, go back and fulfill your role as a wife. And then the third important learning is that we found norms not to be on and off switches, as they often come through in the literature, particularly in the literature that emerged from female genital cutting. We rather found norms to have a varying strength And so Laura and I developed a potential hypothesis of the things that were influencing the strength of the norm, and we have a paper on that. But one of the things that you may look at is just the fact whether the second of these factors, whether the norm is less detectable or more, or the action is less detectable or more detectable. So if you take intimate partner violence, if you take domestic violence, that is very less detectable. So what we found in India, if you recall, is that, yes, these people told us my friends would disapprove of me if they knew I didn't hit my wife. So the norm is there. But the strength of the norm is weakened by the fact that the behavior happens within the household, and so is very less detectable. That's something that might happen in a public ceremony, as certain places in West Africa, not everywhere for sure, but where female genital cutting instead is celebrated with a public ceremony, just to give you a counter example. So I guess this is really what we found and the theoretical reflection, and this has some programmatic implication that Pari is going to guide us through.
So what did we do with all these findings? So it's an intervention project. Of course, we are evaluating it too, but we thought it would be interesting to use some of these findings to refine the interventions. As Ben said, it was not part of a formal research that we did this. A reflection process that we do annually in our programs, where we go down to the field and we'll talk with all the stakeholders and understand how the program is moving, and take some of these learnings to improve programming. So based on some of these learnings, we actually added new sessions in our training, because as I mentioned in the intervention design, doing trainings and reflection trainings and group trainings, group reflection sessions was a strategy that is used in both the projects. So we added new sessions to kind of specifically challenge some of the prescriptive norms and to develop skills to create new norms, like in Samvedana Plus. We added session on social norms and violence, clarifying the misperception of IPs who tend to overestimate the prevalence of violence among their friends or other men, and building skills to support positive behaviors. Because what we also found is that most men do believe that other men use violence with intimate partners in various contexts. But in reality, it's not necessarily true. So when we ask how many of you use, there were around 50% who said they had used it. So we also talked about maybe there is an exaggeration, there is an overestimation of prevalence of violence, and because of that overestimation, you feel you need to use violence. So similarly for Samata, we included discussion on safety and honor with parents, again clarifying misconception of parents that neighbors, relatives, and communities are concerned about their daughter's loss of honor, much more than what actually the reality is, and building skills to challenge some of these concerns. We also identified specific context when these norms take place, and develop messages towards challenging it. Like we found the IPV or intimate partner violence in the intimate relationships of sex workers was largely related to infidelity that the intimate partners think that their lovers are doing it, and they cannot tolerate that. So they do come into the relationship as a client. The lovers do enter the relationship, intimate relationship as a client. But once they become an intimate partner of the sex worker, there is an expectation that the sex worker will stop sex work and she will not have sex with multiple partners, and that's always a matter of contention. There is always suspicion, there's argument, and that's when largely violence happens. Or fear of loss of honor when girls talk to boys or get harassed by boys, and that was a specific context where issues of honor and issue of the fear about loss of honor comes in. Then we also made more brought more specificity around identification of the reference group and engaging with them. What we realized is that the intimate partners influence group was largely the same age intimate partners, and we looked at formation of homogeneous group rather than mixed groups, specifically related to age among IPs when we are doing the group sessions. The other thing was about actually promoting and proactively supporting positive role models. There's a very strong feeling that everybody is worried about my daughter's honor. None of the families or none of the parents allow their daughters to go to a higher education or go to schools outside their villages because people would talk about them. But there are lots of instances where parents are sending their children, or parents are delaying their girls' marriage, or there are quite a few instances where sex workers are getting out of violent relationships, or intimate partners are refusing to use violence, or similarly, young boys are stopping teasing. So how do we engage these positive deviants as role models and as champions to talk about change or develop a positive norm around challenging some of these existing norms? Also increasing publicity around these positive changes, organizing public events or news coverage. We bring out newsletters from our project and have these community dialogues where we can talk about the changes that are happening, where people are challenging these norms or trying to create a new norm. Obviously also doing continuous capacity building of the people who are in charge of making these changes, like the outreach workers or community advisory boards or vigilance committee members, to ensure that they understand and they can reflect on these issues, and they can then become the change agents. I think that brings us to the end of our presentation, and these are some of the people who support this work and fund us. So I'd like to thank everybody, and of course thank all the listeners. And I think we can move to the discussion section of the presentation.
I had a question as you were talking, Pari, about the making adjustments in the program as you go along, and how that works in terms of an RCT. If you're changing, is there any danger that you're confusing some of your findings if you're changing some of your program as you go along? I know that's a question that many people have probably dealt with before, but it was of interest to me.
Similar questions have been asked, and I find that a bit very difficult to answer it, because I'm mainly a person who actually implement interventions. Right. I find it very challenging if I have to wait for 3 years for a finding to come in to make changes. But I think the way we have discussed and justified this is that we are not really changing the main strategy. The main strategy is still group reflection sessions. The main strategy is still community dialogue. But I think what we are doing is that as we are doing programming, if we are learning new things and we need to add a session or put an emphasis on certain things, we feel that it's very challenging if we have to wait for 3 years to make that change. So our justification is that we are not really changing the key strategy or key activities, but we are refining the activities within what we are testing, really.
Right. Other questions? Martine Colombienne has a question. Can you unmute yourself, Martine, and ask?
Thank you very much, Barry and Ben. It's really good to see that findings get used to improve the program. Sort of that happens along the way when you review it every year. That's very encouraging. And I just wanted to go a little bit deeper on the Samata project. Sorry. On what we understand as safe spaces. We talk about safe spaces. And other authors in Mumbai, FATCA, have sort of has been talking about you can look at space as a physical space, so where the participant's going, but you can also look at it as a safe mental space, which comes when the parents feel they can trust their daughters more. And I think both in the Parivartan intervention and in Samata, what we see the parents that let the daughters go to school and had educational aspirations, a big difference between those parents and other ones was the level of communication at home and between daughters and parents, basically. And I'm wondering whether you see or whether you so far have integrated stuff on kind of, is that a norm as well, that you kind of, you don't speak. The children just listen to what the parents do, whereas in those families where there was, they had sort of, they trusted their children, so they had a more comfortable mental space about letting their girls go to school. You see what I mean? I'm just asking for reflections now from your side.
Sure. Thanks, Martin. Yes, I completely agree about the communication and open communication with parents. And sometimes it's actually both the parents. Sometimes we found that fathers are very much supportive and they bring in the mothers to become more supportive. And all the quantitative and qualitative data that we have is showing that girls who have more family support, and the family support comes from the fact that there is open communication, but it also comes from the fact that the parents are also literate. They have gone to school, or they have aspiration for the girls. They support the girls in schoolwork, have much better chances of being in school and staying in school. But what we also found is that those parents also do not necessarily care about what the neighbors say, because the information that they are getting is from their daughter. If they have a confusion or if they are worried about what the daughter is doing, they can ask the daughter about it. And they're not in their mind, they're not making stories, or in the mind they're not listening to somebody else. And that's the kind of difference that we have with other parents, where they kind of are listening to somebody else. They're assuming that when a girl is talking to another boy, they're basically planning to elope, or they'll have to have a relationship, and that will cause problems for how will she get married after that. So yes, so the communication between parents do have a big influence on communication between parents and children do have a big influence on that the girls stay in school, or as I said, even absenteeism from school and things like that.
And in terms of taking that up in the interventions, do you see a way of doing that? Or that may have been done as well, but sort of to really make that visible or audible, let's say, that they sort of increase. Yes.
Fantastic. I think yes. So I think we are doing it in two ways. One is that what we call it samvada, and that is dialogue. So one thing that we're doing is increasing dialogue between parents and girls. Initially, we do it in groups. So the girls find strength, but we also do it at the household level, and we have increased that more and more. Earlier, we used to involve mothers and daughters. That's the easiest. That's the first target. But now we are also encouraging and trying to get fathers involved in the process. The other thing that we are doing is also making sure that these role model parents who are sending their daughters, who have open communication, also get a bit more publicity within the community to show people that there are people like this who keep their girls in school, who are talking about aspirations for their girls after school, who are not talking about marriage at this point of time, so that there is confidence that builds among other parents that maybe possibly they could do it. The other part that we are doing in the context of communication is creating, again, space for boys and girls to talk to each other. Because a lot of the harassment, a lot of the teasing or whatever happens also by the young boys in the community. And so the girls openly talk about this issue with the boys and repercussion of this teasing. It's not about 2 days or 3 days or it's just momentary fun. It's about actually somebody's life changes because of this teasing happening. So how can that be reduced, and how can this increase in communication change it? And also in the community, if you see there is more of these mixed group meetings happening, then just boys and girls talking to each other becomes a normal practice. It's not something very, very special or something very, very bad to make a judgment about. And it kind of normalizes then.
Great, thank you.
We have another question, another hand raised from Sandisiwe Dube. Would you like to unmute yourself by pressing *7 and ask your question?
Okay. Thank you so much for the presentation. Just a question. In terms of challenging negative social norms, I'm just interested to know in your programming how you have managed to tackle if it's challenges, like talking about behavior change in the community would have been for long, thinking that is the right thing to do. I mean, what has been your approach that you've actually employed to get buy-in from the community?
So I think I hear you asking, so on my phone you come across a little bit distorted, but I think you're asking how did the KHPT program manage to change social norms related to child marriage? Is that the question?
Do you want me to go, Ben?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So first of all, we don't know whether we have been able to change the social norms or not. We still don't have any evidence, really strong evidence, really, because the evaluation is still going on. But obviously, any change process, like you said, is full of challenges, right? So some of our challenges have been, also the fact that in our project, we are working with the most marginalized girls, most disadvantaged families, families where child marriage, as I said, is very high, but not only child marriage being high, families who dedicate their young girls into sex work through a traditional system called Devdasi. So it was very challenging. First of all, challenging from a perspective that it's not only the girls, but it's also the structural challenge, the system itself, the families, the culture itself, which supports child marriage. I think some of the ways that we address these challenges, first of all, obviously taking staff from the villages where we are working. So there were local community people who understood the communities very well, who understood the context very well, and then training them to understand why are we talking about reducing child marriage, or why are we talking about keeping girls in school? What is this inequality all about? Is child marriage actually a violence or what? So I think that was one of the strategies which worked well. The second thing that worked in favor of us was that, interestingly, all the girls that we have worked with largely want to stay in school. They largely want something different in their lives, and motivating them to come together and giving them the strength, giving them the encouragement, and giving them the voice to talk against child marriage, or voice to talk about that. we did facilitate by getting them to do exposure visits, going and talking about role models, going and seeing women who have achieved a great deal in their life, or women who have challenged child marriage. So they had that aspiration. We have also worked in these communities for last 10 years. So we have the rapport quite well built in these communities, and our intervention, based on our previous work, was to work with multiple stakeholders. So it was to work not only with the girls, but because we know once you start working with the girls and girls get empowered, they will start voicing out or challenging things, and they're going to get a lot of pushback. So we did, the design itself worked with families. The design itself worked with the larger community. Design itself worked with the child helplines, worked with the government officials whose job is to keep girls in school, whose job is to challenge child marriage. So we have this whole system and a larger group of stakeholders who we involved in this process, the panchayat, the local governance system, so that we could get as much support, and it became a community vision. It became a community goal to keep girls in school. But that doesn't mean, of course, that we haven't received death threats. That doesn't mean we haven't received abuses. That doesn't mean our outreach workers haven't been threatened. So all of that has happened, and today, after 3 years of intervention, we have reached a stage where the community is prepared to make that change, and community is prepared to challenge some of these processes. But that's what we hear, that's what we feel. The evaluation is going to show actually if there has been any change or not.
During the course of your presentation, you have referred back to some of the thinking conceptualization of social norms and gender norms, Ben and Pari, and I wondered if you could give any more thought, if you could give any comment about what some of this thinking and observation, what the implications might be for the ways we can, what changes you would propose. I know this is early days yet, but in terms of the conceptualization and approach to social norms, which, as you pointed out, was, in terms of this particular model of social norms, was very much related to female genital cutting. So as we broaden that lens and look at keeping girls in schools and reducing intimate partner violence against sex workers, what are the implications for the conceptual thinking around this area?
The main point, I guess, is that we need to move away from the idea that social norms are either the only driver or they don't matter. They have negligible influence. And rather, we need to start developing integrated programs that understand how the different factors are sustaining a given harmful behavior or practice. So you might have the laws, the services, the resource distribution, and the social norm. And what is the potential of the social norm to influence these other factors? I frequently use the metaphor of a highway with traffic lights. And if you can't, even if social norms are not the main driver, if you don't take them into account, you might not turn all the traffic lights that need to be green into green. So the importance really of understanding and diagnosis, what are the factors that are contributing to keeping up, sustaining a given harmful behavior is critical. Some people, for instance, might think that in a given context, girls might be valued less than boys. But what you will find again and again is that actually parents have a profound value of love for their children. and that's a positive value on which you can build, and then understand how that positive value is being embodied in norms that end up being harmful, as for instance, limiting the girl's mobility. So I guess that's really the main point, understanding the interaction between factors and the potential for collaboration across working partners to achieve a systemic change over time. That doesn't happen at the end of a project, but rather enters a trajectory that might last a decade, 2 decades even.
I mean, that is an ongoing discussion about, is it possible to shift some of these behaviors and norms, which I understand are very separate, in shorter time frames. So I guess we will be all looking very much forward to the results to know how far these 2 really important studies and interventions go. Laurie says what is different about India is that there is a norm that boys and girls shouldn't even be in the same space after puberty. And this is incredibly different from countries in Africa or parts of Latin America, which is an interesting point to note, particularly for Sandisiwa Dubé, your question earlier. And then,
Yeah, I wanted to link it up with her first comment, and I think that is why it's very important to actually to do a diagnosis of what is the norm that is driving this. Because in our project, initially we were trying to we had assumed that there are norms around child marriage, and we had put questions in our baseline study to figure out the norms around child marriage, and we felt that there were not necessarily too many negative norms around child marriage. Everybody felt that the girls should get married. Everybody wanted their girls to get married after 18 or whatever. But then there was still child marriage. So on improved digging deeper through our Quanti and our Quali and some of these assessments, I mean, not even a formal assessment like what we are talking about now in terms of discussions with the community, we found it's not necessarily about child marriage, really speaking, but it's about girls and boys mixing, girls and boys talking, neighbors talking about these girls and boys talking, and then fear of loss of honor about girls and boys talking, and the space around girls and boys meeting each other. And possibly that's what we need to address, and that's what we need to change, rather than talk about larger issues of child marriage. So that's where, again, I think the diagnostic becomes important. Then again, as I said, we'll have to wait for another 6 to 10 months to understand from our evaluation what change actually happened.
Yes, I think those are important points. So thank you very much, Pari, for qualifying that, and to Laurie for raising it. Pari or Ben, if you want to conclude in any way or raise questions for people to think about further. Any final points?
I guess one thing that I often see with NGOs is a lot of people ask me to revise and review their social norm questionnaires. So one final point is that you can't just go in the field and start to measure social norms without having a deep qualitative understanding of what social norms you're going to measure and why. There is this tendency that you can just go in the field, but what the case study that we've just seen with intimate partner violence being sustained by different set of social norms tell us that we need to understand what sets of social norms are we going to measure, because we know that as these norms sustain that specific harmful practice in that specific context.
Well, I think this has been incredibly interesting, and as this is an area that people are more and more looking towards and investigating, I think this kind of discussion has been probably really useful for across a whole range of other kinds of studies and interventions. So many thanks to Ben Tislagi and to Paranita Bhattacharjee. Thanks so much. Bye-bye, everyone.